All right, welcome to another edition of Open Book. My name is John Gray. I am a journalist and a writer up in Albany, New York, wherever you're watching this from. Hello. What we do is we have authors on every Friday, and you might be watching on Friday. I interview them on Fridays, and then we air it all over the country, and you can enjoy different authors from different genres. We've had children's authors on. We've had fiction with murder mysteries, and we've also had history books on here. And today, this one's a particular interest to me. It's fascinating. The book is called Liberty's Prison: The Inmate's Son Who Radically Reformed an American Prison. And I want to bring in our guests right now. Let's see. We'll bring you right here. There we go. We have Randall Liberty, one of the authors of the book and who sort of lived the book in many ways, and Christine Graf, the author who is, I guess are you a co-author on this, Christine? Is that how this worked?
Yeah, basically, as you probably know, it's all about platform.
Sure.
And so I don't have the platform and Randy does. So our agent suggested that we do it this way.
Got you. And let's begin with you. I don't know where to begin. I guess it's your childhood, Randall. It's almost like you're predestined to have prison in your life one way or another. Talk a little bit about your childhood and how, way before this book came along, what your life was like as a child, because your dad was actually in prison, correct?
That's right. So as the book details, the opening sort of portion of the book describes my mother loading her four little boys in a rickety old car to travel to the Maine State Prison, which is the inspiration for Stephen King's Shawshank. And I was 7 years old at the time. My father was doing an 18-month sentence for burglaries that he did, and we visited him. And that was the first time I went to that prison, and it was very traditional, incarceration, bars and slamming doors, and is a difficult environment for a young man.
And how often did you go there, Randall? Was this like once a month? Not once a week, I wouldn't think, being that young, but you tell me.
No, it was more than 100 miles to travel there. So we went about once a month to visit my father. And, the interesting portion of the hook of the story is the fact that 44 years later, after that first visit as a 7-year-old, I walked through the doors again as the warden. And
yeah,
so
well,
that's, yeah.
We'll eventually get to that. And how, because we have you both on, it's a little tricky at how we want to do this, but I want to bring Christine in too. How did you guys even meet to be part of this book together? Just agents put you together, or did you know each other?
So I was working part-time at Soldier's Heart in Troy, which is a nonprofit that served veterans with post-traumatic stress. It's since closed, but our executive director, Dr. Ed Tick, had been invited to the prison to do a program for veterans. And when he came back and he sort of did his report on what had happened, he couldn't stop talking about this warden named Randy Liberty. And he mentioned that Randy was also a veteran impacted by post-traumatic stress. And at the time, I was a regular contributor to the the PTSD Journal.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh, this would be a great story for the PTSD Journal. A warden with PTSD providing all of these services for incarcerated veterans. And so when I Googled him and I learned a little bit about his story, I thought, oh my gosh, this isn't an article, this is a book. And so I reached out to Randy, and that's how it started. So actually for many years, we never even met. We did everything just over the phone. And
Gotcha. Interesting. So Randy, your dad's in prison, and Christine mentioned post-traumatic stress. Did you go to college, or did you go right in the military? Talk to me a little bit about that part of your life.
So following graduation, I joined the Army, and I was a military policeman. I went to Fort McClellan, Alabama. I served in Korea, and when I came off active duty, I knew that I wanted to continue to serve, and so I stayed in the National Guard, and I always felt called to be an infantryman. And fortunately, in Maine, there was a mountain infantry unit. I did 7 years there, deployed to Italy with them, and eventually I was promoted to, or I applied to be a drill sergeant. I did that for 7 years in the reserves at Fort Benning and Fort Leonard. And then I taught at West Point for 3 years. And in 2004, I volunteered to go to Iraq, and I was embedded with a 10-man team with 800 Iraqi infantrymen. And so we flew to Baghdad, then a place called Kirkush on the Iranian border,
Mm-hmm.
and we trained him for 6 weeks. We went down to Fallujah and we fought the Second Battle of Fallujah, and we occupied a schoolhouse and a soap factory for 10 months, and that was my military experience. But simultaneous to that, I was a full-time law enforcement officer. And while I did that, I was a rescue diver. I'm a master diver, and I pulled 19 victims from lakes, rivers, and streams, under the ice, dark, and rapid water, all that.
Wow.
I was a canine handler, drug investigator, a lot of death notifications, a lot of fatal accidents, all of that sort of trauma from that work. And I eventually was the chief in that department and became the elected sheriff. And I was the elected sheriff for 9 years there.
And how do you end up working at a correctional facility or becoming the head of corrections in Maine? How does that come about?
So as sheriff of Kennebec County, I was also president of the Maine Sheriff's Association, and I managed my local jail, and I also managed the system with other sheriffs. And so I had correctional experience there, and I also worked part-time as a corrections officer when I was a younger man. And in 2015, the commissioner of corrections asked me if I had any interest in working in the corrections, and he eventually offered me the job as warden of the Maine State Prison. And so upon retirement at the sheriff's office, I went to work at the prison, and it was a great fit. I really enjoyed the work. And
Now, is this the prison you went to as a kid? The same
that's
prison?
Right. Same prison.
And I'm hopeful for you. Your dad was out of there by the time you were there. Yes?
He was. He did 18 months, but he was in and out of jail. And so kind of another interesting story is when I came off active duty in 1985, I worked part-time law enforcement and corrections, and I worked at the Somerset County Jail, which is just north of my home. And he was there, not only in the jail, but he was in the unit that I worked.
Wow.
And interestingly enough, there was no training for corrections officers in the early 80s. And so I leaned on him, Dad, what do I do now? And literally he'd say, it's time for count. And I'd say, what do I say? And he'd say, line up for count. I'd say, line up for count. How'd I do, Dad? So he's kind of my field training officer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So now we jump ahead to where Christina calls you or emails you and says, hey, this could be a book. Do you guys get together for coffee, or is this all like over the phone? And how do you just how'd you go about writing this? Did you give notes to Christine? She sort of wrote it out, or were you saying, here, I'll write a chapter, you write a chapter? Talk about that a little bit.
Christine did a lot of research. She did a lot of research, and I've I'm fairly public, so I have a lot of I've had a lot of interviews and articles and stories, and so there's a lot of that. And then we chatted back and forth on the phone and via email, back and forth, and that's kind of how it went.
Got you. All right, I'm looking at the clock. We got to take a quick break. We'll come back. We're going to talk all about the book, Liberty's Prison, the inmate's son who radically reformed an American prison. Now, more with our two guests, two wonderful authors after this short break. All right, welcome back to Open Book. I'm John Gray, and we are talking to two authors who put together a book called Liberty's Prison, the inmate's son who radically reformed an American prison. I read that out because it's an important part of the story. What was the goal with this book? I mean, Christine, we'll bring you in here. You said this would be a great book. Why did you think this would be a great book?
Well, I mean, as a fellow writer, you, John, you recognize a good story when you see it. And when I read that he had become the warden of the same prison where he was incarcerated, I just thought, oh my gosh, like that's just not something that you read about. No. The other thing was I also had read about the transformation of the prison with things like gardens and yoga and all of these sort of programming opportunities that were being made available to the men there. And I just thought it was a fascinating story. And you were asking about sort of how we put it together. Randy's whole family participated, his mother, his brothers. They very generously agreed to share very personal stories because it was a lot of heartache and trauma. His mother was a abused mother. Married his father when she was just 15 years old. His father was 23. I mean, it really is a heartbreaking story, but Randy's mother was just determined that her sons would not follow in their their father's footsteps. So, and I was able to interview people who were allowed to volunteer at the prison or even just work at the prison through these programming opportunities, which is something that Randy made available that just doesn't happen at other prisons.
I was going to ask that. Have you been inside of a prison, not as a guest so much, but more as just someone to see what's going on? I guess the answer is yes, huh?
Well, I had never been. My first visit to the prison was, to the Maine State Prison. But once I started researching the book, I realized how unusual it was. You go to that prison. I was very nervous when I went. I had never been to a prison, but I quickly forgot I was in a prison. There's gardens and flowers and beehives, and everywhere we went, the men were, well, first of all, everywhere we went, the men were so happy to see Randy. At that point, Randy was Commissioner of Corrections. He knew most of them by name. They were all very busy doing things. They were in college classes. They were in recovery meetings. Randy says he doesn't believe in idle time. And so my nervousness melted away because I forgot I was in a prison. There wasn't like what you would think, people
Sure.
screaming, and it was just so much purpose. There were people, John's a big dog person, Randy. There were people training dogs. So we saw dogs, and it just was pretty remarkable.
Randy, did you think before you ever had this job, boy, if I was ever running things, I would do things different? I wonder if what you saw by going to visit your dad, and I'm sure you heard stories, did it shape you where you thought, this could be better, and if I get a chance, I'll make it better?
Yeah, I sure did, both in the Army and in law enforcement and in corrections. When you're on the bottom of the organizational chart, you think, boy, I can do things differently. If I ever have the opportunity, I'm going to. And so I've been blessed to be able to be a warden and a commissioner and make things different, because really, when you talk about corrections, we're asking about what outcome are we trying to achieve? And if we want people to be released healthier than when they arrived, we have to give them medication for substance use disorder. We have to give them access to education and programming and vocational treatment and all of that. And so we got to work doing that.
Did you have some of the hardest of the hard in there? Because I would imagine some people would say, yeah, that stuff, yoga and flowers and walking dogs and training dogs, it works good for some people. But you've got some people who are just, they're just rotten to the core. They've hurt a lot of people, and they're, not that they're past redemption. That's more of a religious thing. I don't think anybody's past redemption, but we're not going to be able to turn this person. And the first chance we get when our back's turned, they're going to, make us regret that we did this.
This is the maximum security prison in the state of Maine. We have everyone that's doing life in the state of Maine is there. There are 90 people there doing life. An interesting kind of unique circumstance for me is when I arrived as the warden, I put probably 30 of them there. And so I had this relationship from the time of arrest to their adjudication to their incarceration. And so I have a unique perspective, I think, from on the street and in the facilities. But no, this is the maximum security prison.
Let's talk a little about specifics of the book, Christine. Is the idea here in this book is it a roadmap for others if they were going to run a prison to say this is how it was done in Maine and here are things that worked? Is that kind of what you're going for with the book?
I do think that is very much sort of what I was aiming for, because Randy gave me this, what I consider to be unprecedented access to actually interview some men who are currently incarcerated. And they were men that I met while on a tour of the prison. Like Randy didn't say, oh, here's a list of names. These are people you can talk to. I said, could I interview these 3 people? He allowed me to interview them by Zoom from their cells with nobody present, nobody saying this is what you can and cannot ask. And I think that level of transparency is pretty remarkable. And I just saw from speaking to men, I also interviewed quite a few former residents who I tracked down on my own. Once again, Randy wasn't saying, here are people you can talk to. I was tracking them down, and just over and over, I kept hearing that these programming opportunities that were introduced after Randy became warden, and Randy believes in redemption and rehabilitation, these men's lives were changed. And I think I became a real believer because I started to understand how this impacts all of us. You could say, well, lock them up and throw away the key, but 95% are going to get out. And one of the things Randy always says is, they're going to be somebody's neighbor. Would you
Mhm.
rather they be your neighbor if they were locked in a cell 23 hours a day and treated like an animal? Or if they earned a college degree while in prison, learned to be a welder, all these different opportunities. So now when they come and they're your neighbor, they're productive members of society. And so also as taxpayers, our tax burden is reduced. So regardless of whether you believe prison should be for punishment, if 95% of people are getting out, I just don't see how you can argue that society benefits when people are rehabilitated.
Randy, doing this job I do as a journalist for 41 years now, the one thing I've seen a common thread with a lot of crimes is a substance abuse issue.
Hmm.
A lot of trauma sometimes as kids too, the situations they grow up in. But treatment, I mean, just Christine mentioned it. You know, it's funny. You can say somebody, we want to spend 10 grand to send this person to rehab on taxpayers' dime. They, I'm paying for that now. You know, it's like, would you rather pay? I mean, what's it cost to incarcerate somebody? It's got to be a lot more than treatment, right?
Approaching 90,000.
Wow, wow.
Hmm.
And do you find that a lot of people, if you break them down where they're not trying to front in front of the other people around them, if it's just one-on-one, they say, I do want to get this under control. I do want help. I don't want to be this person I'm being right now. Do you find that with inmates?
Yeah, I think that most of them are sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? They're tired of failure. They're tired of their families being embarrassed. They're tired of not being able to provide for their families. So we provide universal medication for substance use disorder. If you arrive and you have an addiction, it's a medical decision. It's not a judgment. And so we destigmatize mental health, substance use disorder, poverty, neglect, any of that, incarceration overall. We call our incarcerated residents because they don't need to be beaten over the head and reminded they're prisoners,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so all of that language matters to us, and we have a non-adversarial approach. And just to give you a statistic, when we talk about college, I have 600 people that have access to the internet that are in my custody. And we have individuals that when they graduate with at least an associate degree from the University of Maine at Augusta, they have a 0.05% likelihood of returning to
Wow.
prison. Best money I've ever seen invested. So some really
Yeah.
good work happening.
I'd imagine too that they're great students. They've got the time. What else do they want to put their time into? And if this is an opportunity to open some doors for them, unlike us on the outside who've got a million distractions and our phones in our hands all the time watching TikTok videos and they should be reading our assignments or writing our papers. I'm guessing they're pretty good students too.
Coincidentally, I'm at University of Maine at Augusta right now. I teach a class at 4:00. And so, when I teach a class here, I have 15 students present. I have some zooming in from home, and I usually have 4 or 5 from the prison system zooming in also. So they have access to normalized classrooms with free Mainers. And one of the things that I teach restorative justice and mental health and corrections. One of the things I do is I give the students the opportunity to, in lieu of a term paper, they can come visit their fellow students at the Maine State Prison, and
Wow.
they understand firsthand what incarceration is like, and they can meet with their fellow students.
Absolutely. Looking at the clock, we'll take our second and last break, and we'll come back with our final segment with our authors, Randall Liberty and Christine Graf, the book Liberty's Prison. More on that after this. All right, welcome back to our authors of Liberty's Prison. First of all, that is your real last name, right? I mean, you're writing a book about prison, and your last name is Liberty. That just sounds like a setup for a joke.
No, it's my actual name, and I also attended Liberty University.
Yeah, boy, that's crazy. Do you have a dog named Liberty too? I'm guessing, or
we raised a dog in the Veterans Pod. His name's Liberty.
Got you, Christine. What really surprised you once you really got into this book and started writing it? Because every author wants to sort of have that moment where they go, "Wow, this is interesting. This is going to be good. I like this part. I can't wait to write this chapter." Was there something like that for you?
Well, I think so. I probably interviewed about 40 people for the book. And for example, Randy mentioned the University of Maine at Augusta. I interviewed some of the professors who taught at the prison. And when this partnership first started, and it was actually funded by Doris Buffett, the sister of Warren Buffett, And they had a terrible time finding professors who were willing to go into the prison because Doris wanted them to receive in-person instruction. And these professors, without hesitance, said it was the greatest experience of their life. So everybody that I spoke to who has worked at the prison with these men just speaks about what a rich experience it was and how grateful these men were that somebody cared about them. And so I really learned that small kindnesses can really make a huge difference. And also by Randy believing in these men, some of them, and there's quotes in the book, they want to make Randy proud because they know that some of these opportunities wouldn't have been available had he not advocated for change. And that takes a lot of bravery because if God forbid anything had gone wrong with any of these programs, Randy would have been fired.
It's funny you say that, Christine, because when I look back at my childhood, I'm 63. When I was, 8, 10, 12, 14, those ages in your teens where your friends start getting you in trouble or you're the one leading the pack to get in trouble, the biggest motivator for me wasn't the police or it was disappointing my parents because how they viewed me was so important. I was lucky enough to have a good upbringing with both parents home, and they loved me very much. Randall, do you find you might encounter some people who've never had that strong parent figure? And I'm not saying that you were filling that role, but what Christine said, where somebody finally stopped, noticed them, and cared, and wants the best for them, and they if that clicks inside, they're like, look, I don't know what this guy's deal is. Maybe they thought one thing when they first met you, but they get down the road and think, I don't want to disappoint this guy.
When we talk about adverse childhood experiences, the number one mitigating factor to that is to having an adult, at least one adult that cares about you, loves you. And sometimes that doesn't come. I was fortunate to have coaches in high school and positive male role model teachers, and then eventually in the Army. But some of these people had none of that, and they've never had any success. So when they graduate from a program, or they raise a dog for us, or they, take their first college class, and they're the first one to do it in their families, it builds their self-esteem and shows them they can be successful. And so, yeah, I think that we try to role model what being a successful citizen is, a good student and a good father, and makes a difference for them, I believe. Got
you. And Christine, how long did this book take to write? You said a lot of research. One of the things I try to stress to people who watch this show, and this goes through with all the authors, even the author last week I had on who did a children's book, but he illustrated himself. These things don't come together and it's December 1st, I'll do this by, the end of the year. It takes a while to research and put these things together. How much time went into this?
Well, we started in 2017. The book went from third person to ghostwritten first person back to third person. Probably about 100 rejections before we finally found an agent. So it was a long process filled with a lot of ups and downs. And so, no, I just never gave up because I never stopped believing that the story was one that the world needed to hear. And honestly, the timing of the release, as long as it took and all that disappointment, I feel like the timing is absolutely perfect because of what is going on in our world. A time when a lot of people are not seen as worthy because of their circumstances of their birth or something like that. But I just think the timing was perfect. I feel like the story is needed in today's world, but it was a long journey filled with many, many rejections.
I bet. And for those who don't understand, a lot of times it's a query letter, which you got to send these little letters out and you try to craft that perfectly. Here's the hook of my book. And then maybe you get a response. Maybe the silence can be deafening, though, if you're trying to find an agent or a publisher. And then once you found the agent, were they able to shop it around and get you a publisher?
Well, that was the amazing thing. Once we found the agent, she sold it almost immediately. Wow. All it took was that one person to believe in the project.
Yeah. It's funny. You mentioned Shawshank. There's an old gentleman. I used to know his name. I think it's William something, but he was an agent who was always looking for new authors at one of the bigger agencies in New York City. And he was the one that found King when he was sending stuff everywhere. And then years later, John Grisham, same thing. After all the rejections, was the guy. You just need that one person. It's almost like I've had this conversation with authors. It's almost like actors who you could be struggling in doing regional theater and local. You just need that one role, that one person who says, we're going to give this to a bigger name, but I really like you. And, talk to Ed O'Neill from Married with Children, and he was doing a play in Connecticut, way, 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 way off Broadway. And the casting director happened to be in the audience because his niece lived in Connecticut and saw him, and he couldn't find that character for the main guy in Al Bundy, I think his name was.
Yeah.
And the rest is history. Do you think there's more books that will be coming now, or was this a one and done with you guys?
Well, I believe honestly that Randy's story is worthy of a movie, so
Sure.
I am hopeful that could be a possibility. And I do want to mention Kate DiCamillo, author of Because of Winn-Dixie, 473 rejections for Because of Winn-Dixie, and that was made into a movie. And I actually got to meet her recently. She was here for the Saratoga Book Festival, and so, 473 rejections. I wouldn't even know there were that many people to reject it.
Yeah. Well, that book on writing by King, he talks about the rejection, and he had a nail on the wall that was holding the rejection slips, and eventually it fell out of the wall. And I think the title of that chapter was Buy a Bigger Nail. You just got to, you kind of do have to write these things for yourself. And then if lightning strikes and you can find the agent and the publisher, God bless, right? Mm. Where can they get the book if folks are watching this and they want to read this book?
So it can be located on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Walmart. So any of those three places.
All the usual places, right?
Yeah, really anywhere online. And one of the things I do want to mention that I found particularly inspiring is that some of these men that Randy believed in, some of them have actually, one of them in particular just got accepted to a PhD program in prison. Some of them are holding remote jobs, earning money so that once they get out of prison, they will be successful. And
That's
that
amazing.
makes a huge difference because what is it, Randy? $50 of gate money they get when they leave?
Yeah.
What are you going to do with $50?
Yeah. And we talk about remote work. We talk about a legitimate job on the outside. I have one gentleman at the Mountain View Correctional Facility who is a self-taught coder, and he's a senior software engineer in San Francisco from his cell, and he made 160 last year.
Wow. A lot of money.
And he taught himself. You were saying, John, about having all that time.
Yeah.
I interviewed him for the book. He spent 15 hours a day teaching himself to code because he had access to this laptop because of this college program. Mm-hmm. And he said, where else are you going to have 15 hours a day to devote yourself? And he's earning, what is it, Randy? Six figures.
Yeah, he made 160 last year. And what that means is he can pay back restitution to victims in the community.
That's amazing.
He can pay $1,000 a month and then pay them back. He pays room and board to the Maine Department of Corrections. He pays his mortgage. He can pay child support if he has children. All of that can happen.
All right. We'll have to leave it there because I'm out of time. The clock's ticking away. The book is Liberty's Prison, Randall Liberty and Christine Graf. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Best of luck with this book. I hope it does very well for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for me here at Open Book. John Gray here. We wish you well, and we will see you here next time. Don't forget, keep reading.